marching, demonstrating and protesting, which has no effect on government policy.
That's right. I know, I mean, I've made a stance with my own council tax under Section 15 Article 3 of the Terrorism Act when I got booted out of the South Yorkshire Police for speaking truth to power over the terror threat. So I've been in front of Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council on that legal argument, refusing to pay council tax because of a portion of which would go to South Yorkshire Police who were involved in the concealment of the London bombings. But I also argued that it was morally wrong and we went to war on a lie, on the basis of lies. But you thought the legislation that you would encourage the public who were morally outraged by the wars to actually embrace, and this would involve withholding the council tax in some form or other. Can you elaborate what you've got in mind for that?
Yes, I think that the very important point is it goes back to this International Criminal Court Act and the second half of it. The first three crimes are to do with the commission of genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes. And the second three are conduct ancillary to genocide, conduct ancillary to crimes against humanity and conduct ancillary to war crimes. And the legislation makes it quite clear. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court says if you are aiding and abetting this crime, you are guilty of an offence, including providing the means for the commission of the crime. Now that's very clear, and they have added it to the legislation. And what it means is that if you hand over money which is used for an unlawful purpose and is used to actually commit genocide, crimes against humanity or war crimes, you, because you are funding the crime, are guilty of a criminal offence. Now that came into law in England and Wales on the 1st of September 2001. Mm-hmm. On October the 7th 2001, Tony Blair started the war, or took Britain to war with Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So in law, technically, everyone who has paid tax of any sort whatsoever since 2001 has committed the criminal offence of conduct ancillary to genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes. Now this has been, they've been unwittingly done so.
That's right.
We haven't deliberately done it, but it's very important to get that piece of information out. And because the government never ever explains the laws of war to the public, we need to get that information out, and that's why they have never taken it up. But the crucial part of it is, you must, now that you know that it is a criminal offence to hand over tax, you must stop handing over the tax. And there is a part of the legislation which says that, okay, because it's been unwitting so far, mm-hmm. You will not be charged with an offence if you abandon the attempt to commit the crime. So legislators are saying, look, we understand that people can get conned into committing these crimes, mm-hmm. but once you know it, if you continue to pay tax after you know that it is a criminal offence to do so, you will still be criminally liable under the International Criminal Court Act and under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court internationally. Criminal liability for those crimes as a principal offender. So it's very important for everybody to understand that there is now, for the first time in history, legislation which makes it a duty to refuse to pay tax. And that's the crucial issue. We have to get that information.
And this is quite exciting legislation in one sense. This is important legislation that really, if the public could be alerted to this legislation, they could use and turn this legislation against the government and benefit themselves too. So those that are morally outraged by this have the legislative backing to make a stance by the withholding or refusal to pay council tax until such time as the conditions that the illegality of the wars are actually redressed, and that in the process they could say to themselves, a fair fortune by withholding the tax or refusing the tax.
Yes.
In all aspects, with, as you mentioned, council tax, the local council tax, but also your VAT and your inland revenue.
Yes.
So all that could be withheld with a good legal, an excellent legal argument about the illegality of our wars that we are continuing to enact in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
So how do we get the public to embrace this then?
I think what you're doing now is exactly the right thing, which is to publicise it. We need to get the information out to people and then to understand that this law does exist. I would therefore recommend just go and look at the International Criminal Court Act, section 52, which is to do with conduct ancillary to the crime. And when you look at it in detail, you will understand what it means. It's the same old accessory to murder or whatever it is. You are an accessory to genocide and so on. So just understanding that is the first step. I think the important thing then is for a number of us to join in the sort of movement about, say, refusing to pay council tax. Now, I have approached my local council, informed them that they are committing a crime in collecting tax, because it's just as much a crime to collect the tax as it is to pay it.
And what was their response to?
Well, they've been a bit bemused by it, and they said, well, thank you for the information, full stop. However, we will be raising it in the council meeting. Again, we'll go on and on and on until they understand they are breaking the law. And I think the important bit is that when institutions like councils start to understand they have to do this on behalf of council taxpayers, ratepayers or whatever it's called, and businesses in the borough, then they can do it on our behalf, and they can get the legal arguments worked out and paid for, if you like, by the council, so that it's not just one or two individuals saying, look, this is a criminal offence. It's a council on behalf of all its ratepayers saying, look, we believe this is a criminal offence. We must, by law, stop handing over tax. We must stop collecting it until, as you say, the government is acting lawfully under the laws of war. So that's the second route. And a third route is the same applies to businesses. So a business and a company director, a bank director, for instance, who is handing over millions of pounds to the government, is committing a criminal offence and can be charged with conduct ancillary to genocide. So I'd like to take out a few test cases with some of our banks and BP and one or two other organisations who are supporting this government and the wars, and charge the directors of the company with the criminal offence. And we argue it in court. I want to see the whole issue brought out in court so we can look at what the law says, what has been happening, and whether or not that is a criminal offence.
And we are talking something horrendously evil at heart here, what we're doing in slaughtering innocent women, children, men in the Middle East that have done us no harm.
Yes.
And I think if we bring it down to an individual level, it's a soul-searching question for every single person who's, say, viewing this video, who actually disagrees with our policy in the Middle East.
Yes.
Now, at that individual level where they've got to make that decision, we're giving a clear message here, aren't we? We're saying it's incumbent on you to do this. We're not saying please do it. It says you are committing an offence if you don't do this. So this is a strong message. A little bit nervous about the prospect of entering and embarking on something that's going to bring them in confrontation with the state initially, and a natural fear of them being picked off. What would you say to them?
There's two things I would say. Is first of all, look back in history. All the big changes in society throughout the ages have come about as a result of tax resistance. Magna Carta is probably one of the best examples. Now that came about because the barons in 1215 refused King John's request for more money and troops and so on to fight in Aquitaine. And they said, no, we've had enough. We will not provide any of that until you sign our demands. You agree to our demands. And they put down 63 demands, and he agreed to them all in order to wage his war. And that's how Magna Carta came about. The same thing happened with American independence. America wouldn't be an independent nation state if they hadn't objected to being taxed without representation in Britain's Parliament. And the stamp tax and the tea tax, Boston Tea Party and all that came about. And independence came about for America because they rejected and refused to pay the taxes to Britain without representation. Same thing happened with Indian independence. Gandhi was a great guy. He said, no violence, but we're not going to pay the salt tax. And he got a mass movement going and said, no. And that led to Indian independence. Throughout history, it is all the French Revolution again happened because of the imposition of far too heavy duties and taxes and other things by the government. So historically, it has been the single most effective move that people can take. Up till now, it has always been unlawful at the time. Mm-hmm. And people have had the guts to band together and say, no, we're not doing it. The great advantage now is that for the first time in history, you have a lawful duty to do it.
Yes, that's the key point.
And that's the point, because you can then say, no, I understand the law requires me to refuse to pay tax, and if you want me to pay it, you're going to have to take me before a judge, and we're going to argue this in court. And I say, that is the meaning of this law, and this criminal offence, when you get a conflict of laws, the judge, courts have to decide between them. And we now have 4 precedents. The British government has made it very clear that it is a criminal offence. In the Ministry of Defence regulations, it's very clearly laid out. The British government made it clear. The Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal made it clear. When Germany's leaders tried to argue that they were just following orders and that they ran the war because Hitler had told them to, the judges said, no, that's not good enough. You have a duty to humankind, in a sense, in international law, to refuse to obey the orders of your government when those orders are illegal. Mm-hmm. And that's precisely what's happening now. We all know that the order to kill men, women and children in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Pakistan, wherever it's happening, and we are killing people, that's a criminal offence. Our government is using our money to commit that criminal offence, and we have a duty to not hand over the money because we know that's what it's being used for. Yeah. So I think there are lots of ways, but I do think if we can get lots of people doing this, and we can publicise it, and we can get councils acting on our behalf, and we can get businesses saying, no, we are going to refuse as well. If we get a big chains of pubs and others who say, right, no, from now on, we do not charge VAT on beer or wine or anything else, and we're not going to hand it over because it is a criminal offence. Yeah. You'll soon get a mass movement through the country saying enough's enough, we're not going to go with this anymore.